So, on the Christian calendar, Christmas is not a day. Christmas is a season that lasts for 12 days, right? And we kind of flip that around in our culture, and we think of Christmas as being all the days that lead up to Christmas. But in fact, on the Christian calendar, it's still Christmas season, and the climactic point of those 12 days of Christmas is a very important day called Epiphany, which is January the 6th. That doesn't usually fall on a Sunday, so we have to celebrate it the Sunday before, the Sunday after. But Epiphany is a very important celebration, still in many parts of the world. In the Hispanic cultures, especially, we call Three Kings Day, and is a really, really big deal. It's a big deal for us as well because we get to read this wonderful story of these wise men coming from the east to visit Jesus. It's one of the great stories of the whole Christmas season. And it's such a wonderful story that I'm going to invite you, as you're able, if you would, to stand as we celebrate Jesus' birth and the coming of the wise men. In the time of King Herod, after Jesus was born in Bethlehem of Judea, wise men from the east came to Jerusalem, asking, "Where is the child who has been born King of the Jews? For we observed his star at its rising, and have come to pay him homage." When King Herod heard this, he was frightened, and all Jerusalem with him. And calling together all the chief priests and scribes of the people, he inquired of them where the Messiah was to be born. They told him, "In Bethlehem of Judea, for so it has been written by the prophet. And you, Bethlehem, in the land of Judah, are by no means least among the rulers of Judah. For from you shall come a ruler who is to shepherd my people Israel." Then Herod secretly called for the wise men and learned from them the exact time when the star had appeared. Then he sent them to Bethlehem, saying, "Go and search diligently for the child, and when you have found him, bring me word so that I may also go and pay him homage." When they had heard the king, they set out, and there ahead of them went the star that they had seen at its rising, until it stopped over the place where the child was. When they saw that the star had stopped, they were overwhelmed with joy. On entering the house, they saw the child with Mary, his mother, and they knelt down and paid him homage. Then, opening their treasure chests, they offered him gifts of gold, frankincense, and myrrh. Having been warned in a dream not to return to Herod, they left for their own country by another road. This is the word of God for the people of God. Thanks be to God. Please be seated. One of the great stories about Jesus is the story that a teacher of the law of Moses came to Jesus and asked him what he thought was the greatest commandment. And Jesus replied to the teacher of the law, "You shall love the Lord your God with all your heart, and with all your soul, and with all your mind, and with all your strength." That's actually quoting the 6th chapter of the book of Deuteronomy in the law of Moses. Now, one of the things that tends to distress me in the life of the church is that many of us drop out the third part of Jesus' saying. We drop out the part about the mind. We forget about loving God with our mind. And it might be easy to say, well, that's just something that's just happening lately in our culture. But the truth is, it's probably been going on a long time. There's actually a book that won the Pulitzer Prize back in the early 1960s by a scholar named Richard Hofstadter, and he traced a long history of anti-intellectualism, as he called it. He talked about how we Americans are egalitarians, and everybody is the same, and nobody's better than anybody else. Well, that was Richard Hofstadter doing that in a kind of a secular way, but about a little over 20 years ago, a Christian scholar whose name is Mark Knoll wrote a book that was really kind of an earthquake on the church landscape, and the title of the book was the scandal of the evangelical mind. Now, Martin Old himself is an evangelical Christian. Okay, when he wrote that book, he was teaching at Wheaton College. So he's an insider. He's not an outsider throwing stones. And the gist of the book was that the scandal of the evangelical mind, and really we could probably say the Christian mind in America, the scandal is that there's not really much of a mind. The scandal is that much of what we do as Christians is focused around experiences and emotions and feelings. And we don't often get around to loving God with our minds and to think deeply about our faith. I doubt that anybody here would want to say that things have gotten any better in the last 20 years or so since Martin Old wrote that book. It's not easy to love God with your mind in 2016 or 2017 now, right? It's not really easy to love God with your mind, is it? There's so many distractions in the world, right? There's this mindless electronic media that constantly wants your attention. And how much do you really look at on your phone or on a computer that really has much lasting value? You know, and how much of it is just a distraction? It's not really easy to love God with our minds in 2017. It is worth remembering that there have been many great Christians through the years who have loved God with their minds. There are many people who are considered some of the greatest minds in Western civilization who were Christians, who loved God with their minds. You can think of St. Augustine. Blaise Pascal, now there's a really interesting guy because on the one hand, he's the guy who invented calculus. All you people that hate math, he's the guy to blame, right? But on the one hand, he invented calculus, and on the other hand, he wrote some very, very profound theological writings as well. And you could add lots of others to the list, or Thomas Aquinas, or John Milton, or Dante, or whoever. But there have been Christians through the ages who have set us the example of loving God with their minds. Now, this story that we read this morning and that we read pretty much every year at this time of the year is about some men who did just that. They loved God with their minds. The word that Matthew uses for them in Greek is literally magi. And if that looks a little bit like our English word magic, well, it's connected, right? The Magi were a very prestigious, elite, aristocratic class of people in the ancient world. They were priests, they were scholars, they were people who studied the stars. It would be an anachronism to call them astronomers because there was no astronomy or modern science in their day. They didn't know about black holes and Einstein's theory of relativity and all that kind of stuff. But what they did was with the naked eye, they looked at the movements and the alignments of the stars. We might call them astrologers. In fact, one Bible translation does, but astrology is, that's not really a compliment these days to call you an astrologer, is it? Astrology is kind of falling on hard times. So maybe we stick with the idea, another modern translation simply calls them men who studied the stars. And that's really what they did. They were as close to scientists as you could be 2,000 years ago in a world before modern science. They were men who loved God with their minds because they studied the world that God had made and they looked for signs of God in God's creation. They were highly esteemed, highly respected, elite people. If you wanted to try maybe to make a modern analogy, I don't know if this works for you or not, but think about the astronomy faculty of MIT coming to visit a child in Lugoff, South Carolina, right? The big city comes to the small town. That's kind of what was happening when these Magi went to Bethlehem. So we can call them magi. There's another word that we might use for them, another term that we might use. We often call them the wise men, and that's really a very good term for them. Now, it bears saying that being wise is not the same thing as being smart. Now, being smart means you have a good brain. Being wise means you have a good heart. One of my favorite college professors used to talk about, he grew up in Tidewater, Virginia, and he used to talk about their family had a maid. And he said, I learned early on in my life, if I had a really big decision to make, if I had a problem and I needed to know what was right, what was wrong, and what I really needed to do in life, the person to go to was our maid. He said she wasn't the smartest person in the family, and she wasn't the best educated person in the family, but she was the wisest person in the family. Because wisdom comes out of our hearts. Not only does wisdom come out of our hearts, but wisdom is something that you do. Wisdom is not just what you think. Wisdom is what you do. You put it into practice. This is the basic storyline of one of our favorite comedy TV shows. Any fans of the Big Bang Theory out there? Raise your hand if you've ever seen the Big Bang Theory. Okay, yeah. Thought there'd be one or two of y'all, right? So what's the whole storyline of the Big Bang Theory? The whole storyline is that there are a bunch of smart people who are not very wise, right? There are a bunch of smart people who don't really know how to act. And they can't translate their profound thinking into wise living. And that produces a whole lot of funny situations that we all enjoy watching, right? Being wise is different from being smart. Now, the Bible puts a high value on wisdom. The Bible doesn't really care a whole lot about intelligence. The Bible really doesn't care a whole lot what your IQ is, or what your SAT score is, or how many degrees you have. That doesn't really make a difference. But the Bible puts a high premium on wisdom. And there are entire books in the Bible that are about wisdom. And probably the most prominent of all those books is the book of Proverbs. And there's a theme that runs through the book of Proverbs and really through all the wisdom literature. There's one verse that gets repeated several times, and it goes like this: "The fear of the Lord is the beginning of wisdom." You think about it. It doesn't say having a high IQ is the beginning of wisdom. It says that wisdom is about who we worship. Wisdom is about getting our priorities in order. Wisdom is about giving God the place at the center of our lives that God deserves. And if you've ever read the book of Proverbs, you've probably been struck, most everybody's struck when you first read it, that it's not very deep. It's not very profound. There's not a lot of abstract thought in it. It's very practical about this is how you live from day to day. You know, a soft answer turns away wrath, for example. That's really very wise. It's not very deep. It's not hard to understand, but it's how you live wisely. These men who came to worship Jesus were wise. They were smart. They were highly educated, but they were wise. What made them wise? They were wise because they came to lay their gifts at the feet of Jesus. They knew that the fear of the Lord is the beginning of wisdom. These men were wise not because they were smart, but because they worshiped the Lord. And they put all the gifts and talents and treasure and resources that God had given them, they laid them all at the feet of Jesus. Now here it is, over 2,000 years later, and what I want to suggest to you this morning is that God is still looking today, in 2017, for wise people. God is still looking today for wise men and wise women and wise children and wise youth God is looking today for people who love God with their minds and their hearts, right? Not just one or the other. We don't just need more Sheldons and more Leonards, but people who love God with their minds, but also with their hearts. God is looking for people who passionately want to understand so that they can live more faithfully, right? Our thinking and our living go together. Let me tell you something that's probably not going to surprise you. At Shandon United Methodist Church, we're a very blessed church. We're a very blessed church. You know, at Shandon United Methodist Church, we are running over with knowledge and with education and with skill. At Shandon United Methodist Church, we're full of people who know how to do things, how to get things done in the world. And that's great. But you know what? That's not the real question. The real question is, are we a church full of wise people? Are we a church running over with wisdom? Are we a church full of people who lay their time and talent and treasure at the feet of Jesus? Not just people who use their resources and gifts to make a name for themselves and to look good and to climb the ladder, but are we a church full of people who invest our time, our talent, and our treasure in God's kingdom? Are we a church full of people who invest our time, our talent, and our treasure in God's mission with the last and least and lost of the world through Jesus? That, my friends, is what it means to be truly wise. And today, being the very first day of a brand new year, it's probably a good time for us to take stock. I invite you to take a look inside and ask yourself if you are one of those wise people that God is looking for. You're one of those wise people that God wants to partner with and work with in the world today. Are you committed to laying down your time and talent and treasure at the feet of Jesus, our Lord? Would you pray with me, please? Lord Jesus, we thank you for this marvelous story of these great and mysterious visitors who came to see you when you were just a little child and who brought you marvelous gifts and who laid them at your feet and in your service. We pray that you would give us the grace to follow in their footsteps. We pray that you would make us truly wise. Help us to learn to offer everything that you've given us back to you for the good purposes of your kingdom. We pray these things in your precious and holy name. Amen.